so I don't need this after all. I got this, but I don't need it.
Should we say a few words now?
Yes.
Yes, you do. Are people watching online already? So don't start till everybody's online.
No, it's 3:15 that they. But we just say hello. So we're going to kick off quite soon, but I just wanted to say before we do, this feels like this is a room full of people that I love and admire, and I just can't quite believe it's real. In fact, I think I might be. Am I dreaming? But
it's a dream come true, but also one of the most frightening events I could ever imagine. It feels like getting married. With all the fear, when I got married, I cried, and there was a harp, and so.
So you got us harp, yes.
Yes, exactly, to calm me down.
Wanted to say how grateful we are that you're here. And I'm amazed that anyone apart from family who have to have read the book. But this is hopefully going to be very interactive and a nice afternoon. And we'll stop talking at some point, and there'll be food and drink as well.
There will be also some dialogue in between, and being conversations, inviting changed people. Ru and I were thinking, how can we maximize the interaction? Let us, everybody talk to your neighbor and then feedback. But some people close to us said,
not naming
no, embarrassment, no, just.
My husband said that, who's an orthopedic surgeon, said that sounded like the worst idea he's ever heard.
And Eslich, my wife, said exactly the same.
So we're going to hand over, without any further ado, to our wonderful friend and mentor, John. Who I don't think, this wouldn't have happened without you, John. So
thank you, Ru. And I'm not sure I can keep up this kind of level of jollity that Jens and Ru have started with. I'm actually going to give quite a formal introduction. And the reason I'm going to do that is we have quite a lot of people who are watching remotely from around Europe and North America and maybe even Asia. So I want to spell out some of the context that we find ourselves in. Many of you here will already know this, so please forgive me if it's obvious to you, but it will help the people who are watching remotely to understand what's going on here. And also we're hoping that this will be recorded and the recording will be available. So if we're using this for promotional purposes, it will be really helpful for them to understand why we're here today, who we are and what we're doing. So it's totally thrilling to be introducing this book. May I be the first to say I think it's an absolute masterpiece. And I know I'm biased because Ru and Jens are good friends and colleagues and former students and the rest of it, but I truly think it will become one of the great books about family medicine, not just in the UK, but internationally, a real milestone and a marker for general practice and for our discipline. I'd like to welcome everybody who is here in the room, those of you who are already members of ANPH, the Association for Narrative Practice in Healthcare, ANPH, hence ANPH, and especially those of you who are guests who are here for the first time, as well as people who are joining us remotely. And I want especially to thank Sunny and Jason and Sahan for setting up this remote setup so that hundreds, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people around the world can join us in spirit today. I wanted to explain why we're here. Although this is called the Christian Medical Fellowship, it's actually a base of our Royal College of General Practitioners in the United Kingdom. It's the oldest College of Family Medicine in the entire world, and many of us are proud to have been members for a very long time and contribute to it. It's also significant because narrative medicine in this country was founded by two academic GPs, Trish Greenhalgh and Brian Hurwitz, who many of you will know, and leaders of the Royal College have been supportive and very sympathetic to narrative medicine, narrative practice, and particularly conversations inviting change, which is the particular method of narrative practice that we teach through ANPH. I want to mention particularly two past presidents of the Royal College, Amanda Howe and Iona Heath, who have been on our courses and consistently supported us and stayed connected with us over the years. I also want to welcome you on behalf of the association itself, of ANPH. We were founded in 2016, as some of you will know, so there would be an independent association to promote narrative practice across the health professions in the UK. Before that date, we had significant links to the Tavistock Clinic and to what was then the London Deanery and was then absorbed into Health Education England. But as we expanded and we realised there were, as indeed there have been, political risks to being associated with particular institutions, we formed an independent organisation, and it turned out to be incredibly prudent because we have thrived beyond anything we might have imagined, and we now have activities going on not only around the UK and Europe, but also in North America and Asia. And I'd like to pay tribute at this point to our current co-chairs, Jeff Rickers, who's sitting in the middle there, and Diana Kelly, who sends her greetings from a plane on the way to Australia, so she can't be with us today. They have been fantastic champions of our work, as have all our committee. Now, we currently have between 20 and 30 accredited trainers of Conversations Inviting Change, and two of them are the co-stars of this afternoon. In case you're wondering when will he get round to the book, this is the moment. I have to say that their work in CIC is only one small part of their stardom. I'm proud to have them as good friends and colleagues, as well as, writers who are going to go stratospheric. Rue is an inner city London GP and parent with her husband Al, who is lurking around somewhere, of their wonderful daughters Anya and Ava, as well as being an amazing educator. She's currently working in multi-professional faculty development for NHS England as an associate dean, which I would imagine she probably doesn't regard as one of her most important achievements, although it's pretty impressive. She's pioneering at the moment two other fields. One is generalism in medicine and the other is hermeneutics, and is editing a big volume on the latter with Bob Clark, who is wonderful to see you here today, Bob. Everything she does and teaches is with absolute passion and love, as any of you who have worked with her will know. And what can I possibly say about Jens? Jens is a GP in North Wales, in Llanfairfechan, a name I just love saying over and over again because it sounds so beautiful, and it's in my very favourite part of the world, a magnificent part of the country. Jens, as you may already have detected from his voice, is not Welsh. He's adopted, but his wife Esilt is genuinely Welsh, and it's wonderful to see Evan, his son, here today, and we're thinking of Marley, his daughter, who wasn't able to be here today. Dare I mention that the three of you are trilingual in Welsh, English and German, and that you owe me a trick after the trick I played on you last time that we met, but we'll catch up on that later. Jens is a former taxi driver, a polymath, a philosopher, and above all, and he asked me especially to emphasise this, a complete imposter. As part of his imposter role, Jens is training programme director for the GP specialty scheme in Bangor in North Wales. Rue and I have both had the huge pleasure of teaching alongside him in Portmeirion, which is one of the most spectacular venues in the United Kingdom, and it's wonderful to think that CIC and CIC training brought them together. Now, our distinguished guest speakers will have quite a lot to say about fighting for the soul of general practice, so I'm not going to try and preempt what they have to say, But one thing I should emphasize is it isn't directly about narrative medicine or narrative practice. And I'm saying that partly because I know we have many people watching online who come from Narrative Medicine International in North America or from the European Narrative Medicine Society. So what I want to say is their book is not directly about that, but exactly what it says on the title: the essence, the values and the unique gifts that family medicine offers to individual patients and communities. But indirectly, I want to say that the book is in fact utterly in harmony with narrative medicine and narrative practice. It's written largely around stories, ones that can move you to outrage or to tears, ones that capture the love, and there is absolutely no other word, that GPs can bring to their work, and how critically that love is under threat, yet how it might still be possible for inspired individuals like Ru and Jens to keep the flame alive for themselves, for their teams, and for those they teach, against all the odds. Rita Sharon wrote famously of the triad of narrative medicine: attention, representation, affiliation. I think this book is a hymn of praise to those values. Before I round off this welcome talk, it's also my great privilege to introduce our two guest speakers. We're phenomenally lucky, and I'm really not exaggerating, so please no false modesty here, that two of the world's leading teachers and writers on narrative medicine were due to pass through London at this time, so we were able to tee up this event in order to welcome them to speak to us. Arthur Frank is genuinely one of the pioneers of the field of narrative medicine. Art's a Canadian, Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of Calgary, and author of some quite exceptional books, which many of you may have read. These include The Renewal of Generosity and The Wounded Storyteller. Art draws a great deal on his own experience of cancer with extraordinary openness, vulnerability and depth of reflection. I've been particularly impressed by two of his recent books, which I really recommend to you. One is Letting Stories Breathe. What better title could you think of? And King Lear, Shakespeare's Dark Consolations, which I think displays his exceptional sensitivity as a literary scholar as well as a social scientist. It's been a real pleasure for me to have been exchanging thoughts about narrative medicine and narrative practice with Art over the past couple of years. Danielle Spencer is also a scholar of distinction. With a background in arts and performance, Danielle studied narrative medicine at Columbia University in New York and progressed there to become one of its leading voices internationally. She now leads the master's program in the School of Professional Studies in Columbia, and I've heard personally from some of you here today and other ANPH members how transformative it's been for you to study with her there. Danielle was one of the editors of a core text in the discipline, The Principles and Practice of Narrative Medicine, and many of us have been affected both in our hearts and our minds by Danielle's book Metagnosis, where she draws on her own experience of illness to think afresh about how it's played out in individuals and society. Art and Danielle, it's a huge pleasure to welcome you to the UK, to London, to ANPH, and to this launch. And I think all I need now to do is to hand over to one of the stars, to Jens. Thank you very much.
No, to Art.
To Art.
Yes.
Art. Great. Thank you.
John, that's beyond kind. Oh gosh, I think it must be 25 years ago that I was here at the invitation of Trish Greenhalgh, and she said, "I think you'd like this book," and gave me a copy of John's. Careful of the water right by your foot.
Thank you.
Actually, I'll take it from you. Safer for both. Please do. Gave me a copy of John's first book, and I thought, gee, I'd really like to meet this guy sometime. And it's been such a delight to that was finally fulfilled. And my correspondence with John is just a wonderful thing. But mostly it is just such an honor. Didn't get isolated in the UK market, and I wanted it to come to the attention of readers, that being an American journal. But today I will just say a few things about this. When I read the book, I responded to it really on three levels, which represent maybe my three different identities. One is as a social theorist, because most of what I got paid for in the university was teaching social theory in a sociology department, and then writing about healthcare and attending conferences and things as a scholarly activity. But it wasn't my teaching job. My teaching job was social theory, and this book brings out so many issues and questions about where we are today. I second responded to it in terms of the interest in narrative medicine generally and conversations inviting change specifically. And I third responded to it just very personally as somebody who experiences my own healthcare. And it came at a particular moment for me that I'll say something about. As a social theorist, I've been very impressed recently with the British political scientist David Runciman, who some of you may listen to in the podcast he has with the London Review of Books, Past, Present, Future. Runciman maintains the time we're living in is what he calls the Leviathan. And he bases that on Thomas Hobbes's notion of the Leviathan, of course, and takes up that idea and applies it very creatively to the present moment. The Leviathan is when our lives are handed over, and the title of his book is The Handover. When we've handed over our lives, in the case of healthcare, we hand over our bodies to large-scale government corporate hybrid things, which he calls his are machines. This is fundamentally a book about the NHS. And it's a book about the NHS as a perfect example of one of Runciman's Leviathans. It's a machine that we hand over our lives to. Many of you hand over your working lives to it. All of you who live here hand over your lives as someone who has been or potentially will be ill to this machine. Machines are concerned with what the anthropologist James Scott, and I think Danielle will talk more about Scott, Scott calls the demand that governments have for legibility. That's his word. A perfect example of legibility is my favorite of the visual images in Ruin Jens's book. I think it comes from Jens. It's a screenshot of his computer one day that flashing the message, user inactivity detected. That's legibility. Legibility is we're watching you and we want to know what you're doing. Yeah. And whatever you're doing, we can't see it, and we don't like that. Right? We want you to be visible all the time to us. We want your activity to be visible all of the time to us. That's what Leviathans expect from us. They offer us services. They expect legibility. I'll just say very quickly three things that Runciman says about Leviathans that I think apply to this book. The first is that machines are made of human parts. And that's the fundamental narrative tension in Ruin Jens's book. They are the human parts that make up a machine. And that's a dilemma. How do you be a human part in a machine? The second point is that machines like to talk to other machines. machines are most comfortable with other machines. This is why one of the biggest early successes of AI in North American healthcare has been, this is so American, writing letters to insurance companies refuting their refusals of claims. That where human letters don't get through, the letters written by an AI seem to have remarkable success in getting the initial insurance refusal reversed. That makes perfect sense in terms of what Runciman says. The machine goes, oh, okay, this is something I can understand. But that creates a problem when you're talking to a person. It also creates a problem when you're the person trying to talk to the machine. The third point is that machines literally don't care. Machines don't have bodies. And after all these years, I've got to say, I think the basis of human caring begins, of course, with infantile attachment, but it extends through the vulnerability that we experience in our bodies. If you don't experience that vulnerability yourself, it's very difficult to find the resources to care. Machines, literally, they can mimic caring. They're very good at that because they go through large language bases and they say, oh, this is what humans call caring. I'll duplicate this. But we sense a falseness in it. The medical dilemma that Ru and Jens bring up is that contemporary medicine requires a Leviathan. It's just too big. You need the labs. You need the scanners. You need the high-tech facilities. There's no going back. In the Royal College, where Jens arranged for us to stay, there's one of their exhibits is the black bag that doctors used to have, even into my professional career. They had that. There's no going back to that. You can't put it back in the bag. It's just too big. And so it is going to be a Leviathan, but what differentiates the medical Leviathan from other Leviathans is the profession to care. It professes to care, and people want to be cared for individually. They want a sense of personal contact. They want you to care for them and their uniqueness. We could say a great deal more about that, but I'll keep things moving. With regard to narrative medicine, as John just pointed out, this is not a book about conversations inviting change, but if you're looking for it, it peeks out a number of times. Let me quote the sociologist who was my clearest mentor, who I continue to learn from years after his death, Irving Goffman. Goffman ended one of the essays in what I think is a great book, Asylums, a great book about Leviathans, in his case, large-scale mental institutions, mental hospitals. He ends it writing this: our sense of being a person can come from being drawn into a wider social unit. They're having induction day over at the Royal College of GPs. And so I've been watching all day people becoming a different kind of person as they're drawn into a wider social unit. And you can see it in their faces. It's wonderful. But our sense of selfhood can arise through the little ways in which we resist the pull. Our status, Goffman writes, is backed by the solid buildings of the world. Buildings like 30 Euston Square. Buildings like hospitals that you work in. While our sense of personal identity often resides in the cracks. And that's what Ru and Jens show us in the moments in which they're able to care directly. Two of the passages in the book that I found most moving. One is when Ru encounters a patient who has multiple chronic problems and is seeing multiple specialists and literally seems to have tried everything. And finally, Rue says, I'm not going to refer you to anybody else. And her phrase is that she's offering herself instead of offering another specialist referral. She's offering herself. That's a moment in the crack of the Leviathan of the NHS. That's a moment that the computer screen won't recognize. We risk user inactivity at that moment because it's not going to fit the templates. The complementary moment is when Jens, I'm still trying to get my head around this thing that we don't have in North America of after hours practice. Jens has written me some emails trying to explain to me after hours practice, and it's still a little opaque to me. But clearly he drives around at night. We know that. Yeah. And equally clearly, he sees people in their homes. And I think that's extraordinarily important for this kind of work. And he has to deliver bad news and tell a woman that she has a very serious cancer diagnosis that will probably kill her. And she says to him, I'm glad it was you who told me. That's again in the cracks. It's at night, it's in the home, it's away from the practice setting. But it's finding a place where you can make the kind of human contact that enables someone to respond in that way to utterly devastating news. That brings me to a quotation I found recently, which I think summarizes the contribution of this book so very well. It's from the critic Michael Wood, and it's some of you may have this. It's this year's London Review of Books journal for the year, which is on Kafka, and they quote various writers, and Michael Wood's writing on Kafka, and he says about Kafka, what saves him from the devil's service? And that's the risk of working for a Leviathan, is that you can be in the devil's service. What saves him from the devil's service is neither the system nor a fight against the system. That's the dilemma. We often get caught up in this binary of you either have to work for it or fight against it. But his sheer lucidity about the system's fragile supremacy, that's what really comes through for me in this book. It captures the system's fragile supremacy in the most lucid terms. Finally, I read this book at a time when, because I'd had family care responsibilities, I'd put off my own medical care. And as happens when you put off your own medical care for a while, when they finally catch up with you, you get avalanched with all sorts of things that are wrong with you. And I was reading this book at a time when I was just being buried in, well, you really need to see them. And before I had these health experiences myself, the passage that stood out for me was one that I think was written by Rue about a fellow who's 25 years younger than I am, being diagnosed with osteoarthritis. And she says, he will remember when, I started in the wrong place. He has to ask himself now, she recognizes, how to play this role. And what I really appreciated about Rue and Jens's work is they realize that both the patient and the physician are playing roles. And the question of how you play the role is what it's all about. He will remember that it is caused by his arthritis when something happens, instead of brushing it off as he used to do when he's going up the stairs, takes a corner too fast. Instead of it just being, oh, interesting, it'll be, it's my arthritis. he walks out of this room an older man than when he came in. That passage got to me so much because it took me back and it took me forward. It took me back to a physician who used to take care of me until she got, unfortunately, burned out in her practice and quit, which was cautionary to me. And she told a story about diagnosing a man in his early 50s with prostate cancer. And her diagnosis ended up making, as far as she could tell, absolutely no material difference in his progression of disease and his eventual death a few years later. And one of the most poignant moments I had of a physician telling me the story of their practice was when she recalled this, and she said, all I did was create an unhappy man 3 years sooner than he needed to be. You know, he would have been asymptomatic for another several years, and he would have lived those years much more fully than the shadow he was under. And so Rue's passage took me back to that earlier story. It also turned to be prescient in a very short period of time to my own story. And so the question that I will close on, because it's such a huge question we'd need to start a whole other symposium, is how do you fulfill your legal and clinical responsibilities of diagnosing and telling people their diagnosis and not create a older and sadder patient as a result of the way in which that is conveyed. John and I have been corresponding about that. I think it can be done better. It can never be perfect. It's a dilemma. But I think it can be done better. This book points us in so many directions and is so rich for so many ways in which we can consider our lives, both in the healing professions and in, we hope, finding ways to be healed. Thank you both.
Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments for Art, you know, whatever side you're on, doctor or patient or anyone. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to say?
I'm so glad that you alluded to Kafka, and because that was an undercurrent for the book, and we were not sure, should we give it a kind of political agenda, Rage Against the Machine, or depict it more as, this is so absurd, this doesn't make sense, that machine is very fragile, how do we operate it? Is there a way to subvert it? Is it all carved in stone? And I'm still sitting on the fence whether this is a story of absurdity or whether it's a story of oppression, or is it something like in Foucault's term where I'm part of this, I'm governed and I'm governing others, and there's something us in it where maybe there's a way with patients to operate within these confinements. So I'm glad that you refer to Kafka.
It came through.
And Camilla.
But thank you very much. Really inspiring talk. I was struck by your comment that machines don't care. So I'm a GP. I have the privilege of doing my training with Rue, shockingly, some 21 years ago, in a fantastic training practice that really inspired holistic, patient-centred general practice, which I found at times really challenging to deliver in the area where I've ended up practicing. So I've worked in a variety of practices as a salaried doctor, now currently as a locum. And my question is, what about the doctors, and forgive me if there are any GP partners who may take offence. What I would say is just don't shoot the messenger. I have colleagues and I've worked with the most fantastic partners, and I'm not talking about those partners who burn out, where you know, you get compassion fatigue, etc. But those who just view their work as a business. So, you know, I've done a lot of work supporting sessional GPs, and it's, I know some of this is my lived experience, where you have partners that actually don't care. And then when I talk to people about the algorithms and things, and e-consult, etc., some of my colleagues who are pro-innovation will just say, well, the current system doesn't necessarily deliver a compassionate service. So maybe the e-consultation is better than the human doctor who's just given up, wants to run a business. And actually say, you know, when there are things I've been in situations where you're trying to improve things in practice and the partner's, well, it's not our problem. We just adhere to our contract, that's it, nothing extra. We don't have to be on the premises after 5 o'clock because the GMS contract says a doctor just has to be available after 6:30, but there are other GPs who are carrying on working till 7 o'clock. And there's just that diversity in the way people are trying to, you know, deliver general practice.
And, you know, I ran into exactly the same thing in university teaching. I mean, you could also be describing a split in the university professorate. You know, this is how things. I think at some point, even though as a sociologist I'm committed to keeping people in groups and understanding people dialogically and relationally, there are also ways in which you have to live your own life and take limited responsibility for the lives around you, and just say, well, that's what they're doing, and they're going to get on with it, and I can't change them. You know, I can maybe make suggestions occasionally. There may be little bits of this and that, but you can't let yourself be dragged down by them. You've got to figure, this is who I want to be, and this is what I want to do to be the person I want to be. And if they want to be something else, that's where they are in their lives. I could say a great deal more about the sort of philosophical, spiritual basis on which I say that, but I think that that really you have to pick your moments.
I mean, I think you absolutely put your finger on it, and it's the elephant in the room. And what I've been so keen to do is start a dialogue that's an honest dialogue within our profession, because we have to make a choice, and I don't think everyone agrees with this. So I think it's really a very important point. I think so. There's a few. It's so lovely to see lots of hands up. I think David, Rachel, Lily. I can't see anyone else. I suspect that David was first.
I want to make a very, very broad point, which might appeal to Jens, I suspect. Yes, hello.
Hello, David.
That is, I think we're also dealing with the folly of the Anthropocene. Let me explain. More of something good is not necessarily better, it's often worse. And humans, amongst all the other species, do not know how to stop doing things, right? That is the folly of humankind, and we're seeing it all around us with the destruction of ecosystems, with obesity. There are innumerable examples. Now, we've become very, very good, humans have become very, very good at logic and machines, yes, at systematizing things and predicting things and controlling things. We've become excellent at it, right? And the problem is, all sorts of other things get pushed out. I imagine some of you are familiar with Ian McGilchrist's work.
I was waiting for that.
Yes.
Right, where he talks about the left brain, which is about the part of us that can analyze, atomize, manipulate, right? And the right brain, which is more intuitive and can see unevident connections and can imagine. Now, I think McGilchrist's point, certainly my point, is that our left brain has become more and more active, particularly since the Industrial Revolution. and it has led to an involution of our right brain and our right brain activity. I think many of our predicaments in modern medicine are manifestations of this. Obviously, we're here primarily to consider that territory, not the wider one, but I do think it's part of that wider territory. How we address that, well, I better stop talking because
You know,
I
David,
could
we
carry
were
on for a long
wondering,
time, so that's it.
we were kind of half wondering, Pakita and I, about whether we should have a conference celebrating the right hemisphere sometime next year. So thank you very much. Art, I don't know if you wanted to respond to David or if...
No, it's what you're saying is, I think, absolutely true. Danielle and I were walking by the British Library yesterday and seeing the statue after Blake's etching of Newton. And I think really, if William Blake were here, he would find what you're saying to be a contemporary application of what perhaps unfairly he put under the rubric of Newton, the triumph of the calculator. The other thing is the seduction of actually being able to get something done, as opposed to living with things that will never be completed. It's wonderful to be able to finalize something, and the nature of what we call the humanities is to deal with subjects that by definition can never be finalized. They can never be brought to a conclusion. I think this gets back to a bit of what you were saying. There's some temperaments that just find that so inherently unsatisfactory that they really can't live with it. And they retreat to the soluble, even if they have to do a Procrustean cutting down to make things fit the boundaries of what seems to be soluble. And that becomes especially a problem in medicine and end-of-life care, where dilemmas that are truly existential continue to be treated as a instrumental problem of fixing this or that. But we should move to other people.
Thank you for raising that. I think maybe, I don't know, Rachel, Rebecca, it's so lovely to see Rebecca, Lily, I don't know which order, so I think maybe Rachel was first.
I was just really intrigued by your comparison with the NHS being a Leviathan and a machine. And of course, machines rely on standard parts. And when you make a human a standard part, you know, we all have different DNA, temperaments. The human cannot be a standard part of a machine. So then the machine falls down. And I'm wondering whether that is the root of, as you say, the humans have different, because of our background, where we come from, our temperament, our DNA. We all have different reactions to patients, to situations, and therefore if we're part of a machine, it cannot be a standard component of the machine. It's just not possible.
But it's such a tension because we really try
I
hard to
know.
do that.
You've got all the flashing things on the screen.
No, and that's the perpetual tension. I mean, years ago, I had a colleague who's now in Australia, but was at University of Swansea, Frances Rapport, whose work some of you may know. She did a study of NHS offices, and she photographed people's offices. And the NHS believed that offices should be interchangeable, in that any practitioner could be able to go into any office and work out of that office. And what her project documented in these wonderful photographs were all the ways in which physicians had resisted that. My favorite was a guy who collected clocks. I mean, it was a little on the edge, it really was, because his whole office he'd done in bookshelves that was solid clocks all the way around. But you had no doubt that this was his space.
Did they all work?
I think that's the disturbing thing, is that they actually did. Yeah. We don't want to go too far with that, but it makes a point. There are always ways in which you can you can hold on to yourself and you can show other people that you're recognizing something about them. And that's what really counts, is showing your patients that you recognize what makes them distinct.
Rachel's an architect, so I don't know if any of this resonates in your world, Rachel.
Yeah, I think so. I'm very interested in the cancer, the centres, the Maggie centres. There's a lot of they often have an architectural competition to design them, and they've been designed by some very eminent architects. And I think that sort of expresses how, and they're all very different.
So we've got Lily and Rebecca, and then maybe we'll.
You have to turn it over.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lily, and thank you to both of you for your very brave and honest book. And I'm building on a couple of points that you both made around the work of Martin Buber, who said that all real living is meeting, and that actually, and for those who don't know his work, he wrote about the I-thou relationship. And coming from a non-religious perspective, is that if you think about the conversations we have, which you describe at length in the book, it is about what happens when people meet. And the era of medicine that we're in, Martin Buber also describes the I-it relationship. And the era of medicine that we are in now is characterized by money and measurement, and that is the I-it relationship. And so there is this tension. And I think that, again, moving to the I-thou relationship, that it is that we move to all real living is meeting, and that we think about all the interactions that we have, and that we are present in those interactions, because that's where the healing happens.
Here, Lily.
Sorry, I want to add one point, the existential point, which is that we are mediators of the existential, which is who am I now? So this is through the illness or coming through life. Who am I now? Why am I here? And what am I part of? So it is our role in everything that we do, because we are bringing the learned experience, combining it with the lived experience. That is our role, and that is our work on this mortal coil.
I would like to have physicians who ask those questions about me in my life as their patient. Those were pretty lovely questions. You could construct a whole narrative medicine thing around asking those three questions about the patient. The challenge I would put to the young people being inducted into the Royal Society of General Practitioners is, are you asking those questions about every patient you meet?
The new GMC guidelines are an opportunity, but we won't go there.
Can I just add in one sentence there? Michael Balint, 60 years ago, would have said that has to start with the doctor asking those questions of him or herself.
Rebecca.
I was thinking about when you were talking about Scott and his work around the hidden scripts that happen in organisational life, and that what the book does, in a sense, is bring the hidden scripts into the public realm, and yet sort of the curiosity of who will read the book, and if it's read by fellow GPs or health professionals, that's informative, but people who aren't health professionals, how they read it and how they understand the experience of health professionals and what they're trying to do in this mechanistic world in which we're inhabiting. So I'm interested in your view about how you have that dialogue where actually not only what matters to the patient becomes visible, but what matters to the people who are trying to provide care becomes visible, and how that might help the relationship.
One of the things I've found most frustrating for decades is physicians telling me about almost impossible care dilemmas that they're in, between the institutional requirements and the demands of the patient. And what do they then do? And I'll say, well, have you ever tried telling the patient about what the institution is demanding? And I would get an almost immediate response of, no, you can't talk about that kind of thing with patients. Which I found both realistic and patronizing in equal measures. On the one hand, patients don't want to be told about the institutional inadequacies of systems they depend on. On the other hand, if you're not willing to share your problems with people, don't expect them to have much sympathy for you. And I think that I don't want to ever accuse anybody of creating their own problems, but physicians certainly don't make things easier for themselves by feeling that they have to maintain the front that the institution requires of them, as opposed to just saying some version of, I don't like this either.
But when you say the institution, so the health professionals might be feeling they need to keep up this front, as do the administrators and the managers and others that are participating in it. So I think it's, everybody feeling this need to present this front around what the health service is able to deliver.
Yeah, and I got hired once to do a couple of workshops with senior hospital administrators in a big healthcare system in the U.S. And these were people who just during breaks rushed out of the room to get on their cell phones to check back in with whatever they were doing. And it was very sobering doing this for a couple of days, because I realized that even though they're often the people who are demonized by the frontline actual providers, everybody's got their problems. And they too are up against really difficult forces. Now, where this goes completely over the edge is in the United States with the incursion of venture capital into healthcare and buying up more and more hospitals and treating them the way venture capitalists treat any acquisition, which is basically you extract as much profit, you load it with debt, and then you get rid of it. And that is truly insidious. And if you're working for an organization like that, I think you've got a whole level of problems beyond working for the NHS, which still has a vestige of responsibility to somebody other than shareholders. But that's where I'm very glad not to live in the United States, and that's a great segue into Danielle. Sorry. But it's the, and of course in Canada we perpetually risk getting sucked into the American vortex. A lot of the big American healthcare systems have for years maintained offices in Canada, basically waiting for the system to open up to privatization so that they can leap in. But that's truly dark. You took us to a dark place.
Thank you so much, Art. That was just brilliant. So Jens and I are not going to make any speeches because we couldn't compete with Art or with Danielle. We will kind of give up our chairs because I see that a couple of people are standing at the back. David, please come and sit down.
Sean.
So we were just going to read a few excerpts from the book and then hope that it generates some conversation. That's all that we were going to do. That's okay. So I think I'm going to start, Jens.
Yeah.
Okay. You feel like the GP is a machine which is processing you. They were words straight from my father-in-law's mouth at a time when he really needed the NHS, actually, in August 2021. In general practice today is like a factory with a daily quota of outputs that must be generated. There are targets for vaccinations, for cervical smears, for recording blood pressure, weight, smoking, monitoring and treating chronic disease, drug monitoring, prescription monitoring. The surveillance machine is working at full steam. And all these outputs generate multiple new work streams, managing abnormal blood results, managing test results, abnormal smears, recalling patients, answering questions about prescriptions, dealing with letters from hospitals with requests for more monitoring or referrals, a myriad of forms to fill in. The machinery is whirring, all employees are occupied, there's perpetual movement and noise, alarms going off, unexpected inspections. You know, patient-centred, personalised care is the mantra of the NHS. The NHS speaks directly to you, the citizen patient, and pledges to put you, your family and carers at the centre of decisions that affect you or them. But the problem is that the health system is designed with population health in mind rather than relational individualised care. And that creates a paradox which GPs and other primary care clinicians are left to negotiate. In my practice of 14,500 patients, we send out about 400 texts a month, inviting patients in for some form of screening or surveillance. With Carolyn and Jude, my partners sitting there, I've become a nuisance cold caller. I cajole patients to come in, whereas others who don't fit into chronic disease categories struggle to be seen at all. Just change slide.
You don't see that.
This population health approach has benefits.
I changed it long time ago. I see something you don't see.
Does not fit naturally with a personalised care paradigm. It's therefore an implicit but fundamental part of the job of the primary care clinician to navigate a path of individualised care that's set against a backdrop of standardisation.
It has been there for a while.
To negotiate the tension between the patient as representing a population average and the patient as an individual whose life circumstances have to be taken into account. In this way, GPs and other primary care clinicians serve two masters who have different priorities and value systems. Contemporary semi-automated healthcare thus conceptualises GPs as street-level bureaucrats who must constantly negotiate the needs of the client with the agenda of the organisation.
I'm a street-level bureaucrat. And I work exactly with the tensions of a street-level bureaucrat in these systems. I'm paid by the health board. The practice gets paid and is thriving or not thriving, meeting these demands, whilst I'm attending and trying to be present to the eye, though interpersonal space, with a patient that managed to get into the space with me. The way to get there is sometimes cumbersome and often negotiated and transformed via access platforms who claim to do some security work, filtering work, or aspirational as Amit wants to do it, that it makes this Disneyan moment of healing happen. So are these access systems barriers or facilitators? That's up to us in this Leviathan system. When working within neoliberal bureaucratic systems, the scarcity paradigm that there can never be enough resource to match demand, in German, für alle reicht es nicht. There's not enough for everybody. There's some inbuilt rationing. Becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is because there's an underlying assumption that all human maladies can and should be slotted into medical categories and thus incorporated into protocols and from there into pathways. Faster, so it all looks like Birmingham Spaghetti Junction. The obvious answer is endless expansion with more and more services and complicated referral pathways set up to deal with the apparently increasing demand, which it could be argued is self-generated. We try to put all human suffering into a medical category. And ever-increasing demand must be managed somehow. So the question, what is urgent and what is an emergency? Yes, the GPs is a never-ending question, but what is urgent, what is an emergency in primary care? For the last 20 years, I've been circling around this time and time. Is if you run out of money, if your benefits cease on Friday, an urgency, the partner would say, no, of course not. They have to be disciplined, organized. And said, what would happen if your credit card gets eaten up? That is an urgency. So we are embedded in processes of social administration where it's very difficult to say what is urgent, what deserves to be prioritized. But the problem, no, I'm back on track. That was Ruth's problem. Now I'm back with my problem. My problem is that services are underfunded and overstretched. The management of waiting lists, queues, and access takes all up available headspace, and the call for standardization that we had before from the welcome a while ago, and uniformity and fairness around access is loud. And also in our circles, the question is, how do you ensure equity if you have got some people who are puppets and others you treat like parcels, go through the system and so forth, which happens when you invest or attach to a person or a problem or not. Many GP surgeries now use form-based online triage systems such as eConsult, Patches here in London, AccuraRx and so forth, which require patients to fill in details about their symptoms as well as other information to feed the Leviathan monster, such as smoking status, alcohol consumption, psychometric questionnaires about depression and anxiety. We need data. Practice teams respond to these forms with anything from a text message to a telephone consultation or an offer to a face-to-face appointment where the magic can happen or not. But some clinicians avoid face-to-face consultations, which require the interaction to be processed in emotional as well as cognitive mode with left and right hemisphere. When a problem is presented as a disease category, it enables a response which is purely cognitive, with less emotional burden and investment on the practitioner. A headache on a form is simple, linear, and logical. There are clear guidelines which can be applied. This is in contrast to a real person with a headache. Ceci n'est pas un headache, that's not a UTI, whatever this transformation when your imagination is not switched off when you're present. And that's the purpose of the organization, to make this happen. How can you make happen that the practitioner is present, imaginative, connective? The people can have a background of stress at work, unhappy relationship, domestic violence, economic uncertainty. Since it is so much simpler, the temptation is to treat the form-based representation of the symptom, particularly in time-pressured settings. Indeed, some clinicians prefer the neatness of the story represented as data capture points, which can be processed remotely. Interactions which take the presenting symptom at face value can send patients down rabbit holes of pointless investigations and treatments. People may reconsult time and time again until the clinician gets right or the story changes. Unintentional injustice can arise from systems which relies on patients being able to explain their symptoms accurately on an online form and to follow a flow chart of questions before being allowed access. But that can be very, very different in hyper-diverse settings like here, or if there are people who don't articulate themselves with we are at big risk to neglect these parts of the population who needs us the most, who need the imagination, the knowledge and the emotional capabilities we have. It makes services more open to some than others, particularly when mental health is concerned. Remote consultation can disadvantage vulnerable patients who can't express what they are feeling. There is a fictional remote consultation based on a true story, which Ru and I will reenact right now.
Yeah, we will. Okay, so just to give you a bit of background about Charlotte. 15 months after the birth of her son William, Charlotte has days when she feels so numb that she questions whether she's still alive. She worries she's having a breakdown when the bad feelings that she can't control bubble and churn around inside her. She doesn't feel like herself anymore and wonders why the world feels so distant. It's like going through life wrapped up in a paper bag. She's so tired that sometimes she thinks that she could lock herself into her bedroom and sleep forever. She loves William, but she no longer trusts herself to parent him. And she's hoping for help from her GP. So she sent in a triage request and she's been given a phone appointment. And this is how it goes. Let me see.
I'm Charlotte.
You are. You always were Charlotte.
And I really worry about my son William. His eczema is flared up again. And I need definitely to get that treated, because if he's not right, I'm not right. William isn't well again. He isn't sleeping. His eczema has flared up.
Hello, hi. Well, has William got a fever? Is he coughing?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well that's good. Is he, is he well in himself?
No, but I don't think he's eating very well. I'm really worried about him.
Well, has he got any other rash apart from the eczema? I mean, is he vomiting?
No, he's not eating very well. He's not his usual self.
Well, toddlers are often fussy about their food. Don't worry. And many children of William's age have eczema. I'm just looking at the photos that you texted, and actually, the rash looks exactly like eczema. So don't worry about it. That's fine. If he's well in himself, that's really good. And so you've got moisturiser. I can see you've got moisturisers, and you should have a steroid cream on a repeat prescription. I think my colleague told you last time. You moisturise every day, and then you just apply the steroid cream for a few days during a flare-up, because I can see from the photos that that's what it looks like. And actually, you don't need to call us if it's not too bad. Just use the steroid cream for a few days, and always moisturise.
I didn't want him to have steroids. Is there an alternative?
Really, not really. There isn't an alternative. A few days of steroid cream is perfectly harmless. Don't worry about it. Oh, hang on. William's due for his MMR. It's really important that he is vaccinated. So please remember to make an appointment. You can do it through reception, or you can even do it online now if you go to our practice website. So I think that's all, isn't it? Well, I hope William's better soon. Bye.
What will I do as mum of William, and how will this carry on?
Well, from the GP's point of view, there's nothing wrong with William. And she's right, isn't she? She just hasn't understood that it's Charlotte and not William who needs the help. Now, at best,
the consultation is a waste of time for everyone concerned, and at worst, it is actively harmful. Unfortunately, that's never going to be captured in any audit of services. The health service is overstretched, but trying to save time through quick, impersonal, remote consultations can have the opposite effect. And Art, you have seen today the graduates who went through all this, and the big question in assessing such consultation is, do you judge whether it's right to treat the steroids, to treat the eczema, or do you attend to the care, to the distress of the caregiver? The jury is out. It's easier to assess the easy one. How is the eczema managed?
I had to just open that up. I mean, does that I'm so sorry for people who. There's another chair here. There's another one there. There's another one there. Please come and sit down. Does anyone want to comment on that? I mean, it was sort of, obviously we were exaggerating, but only just, to be honest. John.
Thank you. I mean, wonderful and so poignant. There's a dilemma for GPs, which I summarise as, we don't have a podiatrist, so there's nothing wrong with your feet. What that results in, I think, is a terrible moral dilemma for the practitioner, which is either we cut ourselves off from the suffering because we know we cannot address it, or we substitute ourselves. And I think one really urgent question is the increasing number of GPs who are substituting themselves and getting burnout. Obviously one problem is the GPs who just don't engage with the suffering because it's unbearable, and they don't even know they're not engaging with the suffering, they don't even recognise how unbearable it is. But there's the other problem, which is GPs substituting themselves and then suffering the burnout and the mental and physical problems that go along with that. I don't have a solution, I'm just naming it, but I think, not myself anymore because I'm retired, but I think all practicing GPs are sitting permanently on that cusp. And to be honest, I don't know how you manage it.
I can answer from North Wales. Most hospital services have either dwindled, dermatology is non-existent, so I have to do what you describe, or for myself, doing more holding work, running risks in the field of dermatology, mental health. I have to prescribe often antipsychotic medication so I'm pushing way above my confidence and competence zones. Often it goes well if I follow things up, but there's a limit to what can be done.
We've got so many hands up.
David?
Okay.
And
I think I link this again to right and left brain and all of that kind of stuff, and all the advances and reforms and management initiatives over the last 40 years have accelerated and amplified the explicit at the price of the implicit, which is about meaning, which is about about inner experience, and about people's kind of unspoken connections with one another. And that's in a way what this story is about, isn't it? That it cannot engage with the implicit.
No.
Partly because of the remote technology that is being used, but partly, increasingly, because of the engineered mindset of the practitioner. Okay.
It's why for me, that's why I wanted to write the book. Completely.
Thank you.
I think this. I don't know. Was Ella next?
I just wanted to say you both acted it beautifully, and what happened to me when I was listening to you was I empathised with Rue as thinking of her as the GP registrar on Friday afternoon with this list of calls and picking up that one and thinking, oh God, I hope it's something simple, it's something I can deal with, and it's not going to be something impossible. So just echoing what John said, making that sort of choice of thinking, just focus on the eczema and the baby and hope that they're going to be fine. And I don't really want to sort of, the mother sounds a bit fragile, but I just don't want to go there.
No.
It's really too much for me to deal with.
And I think it's not okay. So writing about this was to sort of really to highlight that. I think I often get confronted with people saying, but we've got to do what's good enough, and maybe a bit controversial, but for me it's not good enough. It's rubbish. It's not doing anyone any good, and so we have to be more than good enough, I think, but it's hard. Claire and Amit.
Yeah, and I the whole book resonates, but that scene in particular, and I was thinking about, I think it was Camilla's point about older partners not supporting the next generation. When the ray of hope I see is that I do because I'm old, I'm part-time now, and so I do my clinical stuff and have space for it, but I'm also doing outreach work into the community, and I see children and teenagers and medical students who I hope can be those asymmetrical, awkward cogs, because I don't think the current group of 18-year-olds who believe that our generation is destroying the climate, who believe that our generation is allowing war to destroy the world, I'm not sure that I believe they will be as stamped down and fearful
I hope so.
as the people living it. And that's the kind of bit of ray of hope I get. And I guess your book is part of that bit about flourishing, like Louise Uni's work on flourishing with the current medical students. What is it that any of us in the system can do to tweak the edges enough to give people little bits of space to allow them to go on being human?
I'm sure that avoiding moral injury is a way to flourish. And
well, just mirroring what David said, I think Gregory Bateson had something like that. I can't remember the exact words of his. The gap between the way the nature works and the man thinks that the nature works. That's at the crux of the sort of the dilemma that we face in our day-to-day life. In a situation like this, we think it should be like that. Nature doesn't go like that.
No.
That we don't recognize, and there we are.
Yeah. It's I think John taught me how important it is to be curious, and I think these systems, they don't encourage curiosity because curiosity takes longer, and so you sort
I
of
doubt it. I really doubt it.
Maybe.
But Paquita and John.
I mean, when I respond to something like this, I want to know what's the background, what's the story. But presumably it was in the notes that this mother had this, what is in fact strong dissociation, which is very worrying because it could segue into psychosis, bipolar psychosis. So, I mean, when I was doing on call, I'd always ask mothers, how anxious are you from 1 to 10? And if it was very anxious, what do you think's going on? What would make things feel better? Shall I call you back in? And get them to say what it is they need. So I find this response bizarre, really. But I can see how it's happening. But in a sense, it's bizarre because it's not listening.
I had last week a complaint from the daughter of a woman, and I saw her on a Monday afternoon, very busy, alone, duty doctor, and she couldn't come to my room, and she said she had swollen legs, and that has to do with the odor of her urine, and I was really, really rushed, and I shut her up. I knew I will see you again, something later will happen, I'll do something. So, and I got then a long letter from the daughter who was this addressed to me about this doctor, which was me, saying this doctor didn't take oxygen saturations, he didn't explain, he rushed her, and it was clearly the account of a very unsatisfactory encounter. I read it, I thought, it's actually true. And I phoned, I said, I was the doctor. And I thought, that's true. I felt really bad, and I think that's why I said I doubted that that you work faster. I worked faster, and I got the complaint, which has its own life. I had to phone back. So it didn't save me any time at all being rude, not shutting down. I didn't want to be rude, but my emotional availability was very low. My cognitive ability even lower. I just wanted to get through the list, and that's.
People come back, don't they? Charlotte, if once she's sort of recovered from this terrible consultation, will come back. She'll come back until she's helped, and so it's very inefficient. I always thought that this sort of 10-minute, very quick model is incredibly inefficient.
Selwyn?
Oh, sorry.
I'd just like to say, I think we're all being a bit despondent. I think I've been in general practice quite a long time, and before standardisation, things were a lot worse. No diabetic lists, no blood pressure lists, no prescription lists, nothing. And patients really at the whim of luck more than anything else. Now all these groups of patients are looked after much better, drugs are better, technology is better. The doctor-patient relationship has always been a personal thing and a very difficult thing to manage and to quantify and to magnify and perfect. It was then many years ago, and it still will be another 20, 30 years. But I think one should be optimistic that things will take a bit of work now.
I think we never wanted to go back to some kind of idyllic past time, because we recognised that there were lots and lots of flaws with that era. So what we're really calling for, I think, is a third era where we are able to do both. But absolutely, thank you. Ulrika.
I'm not a doctor, but I really loved what you said about starting with that open question, how anxious are you? Because we know how many mothers are depressed in the first 2 years. But then I was just thinking, it's what you said before, it's how you communicate something. So for example, if you start like that and then you go on to the steroids and you say, I don't want steroids, and there is no reaction to find out, there's no curiosity why. You know, if you could just have, stop there and say, okay, tell me, why are you concerned? Or because I've heard this and that. Then you can break it down into an intellectual conversation. Or it could be, it could be based on something that is completely irrelevant and not true, or they're comparing it to oral steroids or whatever. So, even just back off and just taking time and be curious and listen. Because some people would be, totally not anxious and have a full medical degree and you have no idea about that. So they just want, I've got 3 issues, I want this for my steroid cream for my feet and I want this and this. Okay, fine. But if you know that they are there in their knowledge. So to be, just stop and be curious, where are they? They might not even understand English properly, and then you need to speak more slowly. So that I just thought that was such a great way of starting.
John?
And
thank you. Well, just more generally, I wanted to thank Ru and Jens for the book. I think it's a fantastic and important book in general practice, and I really would like to see it on the reading list for GP trainees across the UK, including Scotland, where I've worked for many years, because I think it's relevant and it's a bit polemical, if you like, and I think that's a good thing. I think we needed this sort of polemic at this time. But we can't afford to lose some of the important measurement stuff that Selwyn was talking about. Of course, it's how we move forward. But I thought, so I led a project called The Essence of General Practice, which published in PJGP in 2009. The Essence of General Practice is a phrase from not from me, but from one of my colleagues. I think it was Stuart Mercer who coined it, actually. So, and we published it with an editorial by Iona Heath, and then two quite significant commentaries. So it's a kind of predecessor of your work. But your work explains where we are 15 years on. But I just wanted to share a quote. We asked a lot of patients and doctors to set out what some thoughts that they had in general practice. And the one that really stuck with me, and I think is relevant now, is from Ewan Patterson, who was a GP in Postle Park, which is probably the most deprived part of the west of Scotland. And he said, sometimes keeping the NHS and the patient happy are two completely different.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of what you go over in the book is related to that.
That's how I feel.
The way it relates to Huber's I it and I thou as well. It's the system and the relationship. And I think you can't, and I think it's a constant dynamic, I think, but how do you, addressing the structural change that's needed is the big challenge.
No, one of the kind of things that I think was one of the first triggers for wanting to write about this stuff was noticing that lots of trainees just kept saying we don't do this, we don't prescribe this or that, and I think it's a manifestation of this kind of dual identity. In a way, thank you so much, John. And sorry, Lisa's had her hand up for ages. Sorry. Sorry.
I just wanted to sort of draw on a few of the different observations I've had from all this really good discussion, and I'd agree absolutely there wasn't a golden age of general practice. I've been in it long enough to remember previous sort of iterations of the challenges, and it always strikes me, not coming from a sort of early life of all this technology, I've had to try and keep up with it, and my children often mock me for failing to do so. But it always strikes me that it's utterly amazing what we've got at our fingertips. I still continue, I no longer practice clinically, but finished just recently, and it never ceased to amaze me how much better it was, much as I hated a lot of aspects of EMIS or whatever system, that at one finger I could have all those past bits of information brought to me to try and give a picture. And I see our way forward is we're renegotiating our role. The old paternalistic models that are really outdated, we're long past those, but we've got to learn a new model with a more empowered, a more informed patient who expects technology, expects fast pace, expects the very best. And we've got to find our way through that with the time for the discussion, and there has got to be a way to get better at using the technology for our own purpose, not to feed the machine, because we're feeding the machine at the moment, we're not extracting what helps us. And to me that's the mindset that I hope we can, or my colleagues can change.
Well, I know that Richard might want to say a few words about this because it's so relevant. I think your work that you're hoping to.
I believe that people my age should shut up and listen. But and I entirely agree with someone's point that there was no golden age. We did things badly. We learnt on the job. Patients suffered as we learnt. And I very much agree with your point that technology now offers us ways out. At the moment we're stuck in this algorithm will see you, and we're turning ourselves into human algorithms, at least those of you who are in practice are. I think the transhuman algorithm machine, which is generative AI, may offer a way out, but it won't offer it of its own.
No.
We need to inform it with values. Indeed, we need to inform it with a morality. We need to inform it with idealism. We need to inform it from patients above all. And this is a fantastic challenge for the new generation, who are all being burnt out through doing things that frankly doctors shouldn't have to do at all, which is all that administrative, preventative work. Someone needs to do that, but we are the specialists in those human interactions which we heard so eloquently about. So I want us to be optimistic, but not unrealistic.
Yeah.
And now I will shut up.
Well, I think we have to be clear about what our meaning is and what our purpose is, don't we?
There were so many. In terms of process, I wonder we narrow our future bits here.
Yeah, definitely.
And more interaction
Absolutely.
from yourselves.
This is fantastic.
And there's also Danielle who is contributing. So I wonder whether we have 10 more minutes of conversation.
Absolutely.
We hold back what we really want to say because because we are really on something important right now.
Yeah. I think that lots of people...
For Danielle's sake, 5 minutes maybe, and then more discussion afterwards.
Okay.
I agree.
All right, so we've got... I don't know who had their hands up first. I think Sunny definitely did, and Vayu, and... Edwina. Sorry, there were lots of hands.
Edwina, Sunny, Vayu, David, short please.
I mean, my question is really, I think we're entering the era where general practice is going to have to decide what its identity is.
Yes.
I love being a GP. I couldn't do it like my husband every single day, but I do love being a GP. For me, poetry is made in the way people present the daily symptoms, and I have this very difficult balance where if it gets too samey, I'm bored. But it's the fact that the headache that I know about for 25 years or the UTI isn't ever packaged in the same way. It's a poem. It comes in an individual form that has meaning, relevance, timing, and if I'm not tired, I really love it. And I enjoy
Exactly.
it. But if I am tired, thinking ahead of the 600 different clicks I have to make in order to then take that narrative and somehow synthesize it into an algorithm that works, that's tricky.
Yeah.
I think there are so many questions that come up from the way in which medicine is evolving, technology is evolving, our knowledge evolves at a much greater pace. And I think that the balance, the John Launers who have taught me have helped me stay sane. And I think now I'm going to add the Rue and the Ents to that. And thank you very much.
Beautiful way to put it, Sunny. Thank you so much. So Eugenia and Vayu and Edwina and David, in that order.
May I make another intervention,
Yeah.
which is maybe we can remember who was waiting to talk, and I'm conscious that Danielle's been sitting on the sidelines here
Yeah.
for a very long time.
Okay, should we hold on to that?
One or two more people, and then if everybody could save.
That sounds like a great idea. We'll close at the yeah. So maybe Eugenia, and then we'll move on to Danielle, and then come back to Vayu and to Edwina and to David.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for the book. I'm Eugenia. We've emailed, and I'm unashamedly a huge fan of this book. And so recently I was had the opportunity at the Educator Conference to share some of the messages about street level bureaucrats. And sorry, I came late because the clinic ran late. So
It's a great news.
And the way that you talked about bureaucracy actually for educators, and there's so many seasoned educators in the room, that it's so easy to become a tick box. There's so many workplace-based assessment, all this clinical law, all the competency assessments of actually encouraging educators to think beyond the typical doctor of its entitlements of how do we train the next group of the GPs to come, and the curiosity beyond of what's been presented as a trainee and the trainer. There was lots of really rich discussion, so thank you so much for putting
I'm so
that
glad.
through.
Thank you so much, Eugenia. Okay, I think John is right that we must hand over to Danielle, and then we'll come back and we'll sort of close up and get people to speak. Over to you, Danielle.
Thank you.
Should we go and sit down?
Thank you so much, Danielle.
Now, there's so much vital conversation to be had. Let me add my thanks from me and Art for having us. And also, thank you, Art, although not thank you, for setting me up as the American representative here. I'm going to be an apologist for the American healthcare system today. No, it's going to be a redemption narrative, actually. So I'm here from, just in from New York. I'm in the Columbia University Narrative Medicine program. Yes, that Columbia University, about which we are reading in the paper. And I think this is an extraordinary book, and the timing is extraordinary, and there are connections, as has been noted, to so many different aspects of our lives. So we're talking about the context of healthcare here, but I see many connections to pedagogy, working in the university, and other ways in which we are grappling with the systems that we have created ourselves. So the book describes the ways in which contemporary healthcare has become, as we've heard, akin to a factory replete with machinery, characterized by automation and standardization. Yet we're also asking at what cost? And the book is asking this question, and we're asking this question. So for just some context, I propose that we put this depiction of protocol-driven medicine and bureaucratization, replacing the life world of stories with data, in many cases, put it into conversation with other systems of legibility and control and their effects upon the life worlds that we inhabit. So, for example, as Art mentioned earlier, James Scott's Seeing Like a State analyzes efforts to, quote, rationalize and standardize what was a social hieroglyph into a legible and administratively more convenient format. And in this book, through a series of different studies, Scott demonstrates the ways in which singling out a limited set of measurable outcomes, while, of course, a very powerful set of tools to achieve knowledge, can damage the health of the system, and eventually it can damage those very outcome measures. So his first example in the book is late 18th century scientific forestry. Naturally, you expected to come here today and discuss scientific forestry, beginning in Saxony and Prussia, isolating a single metric of commercial timber production. The rich soil of the natural forest sustained the new legible colonizing monocrop for a generation before, as we know, the ecological life world was depleted, often resulting in Waldsterben,
Waldsterben.
Thank you. Or forest death. And we see a version of this mindset described in Richard Powers' The Overstory, the novel. Oh, I'm so glad to hear the murmur of recognition. For those who haven't read it, go home, just leave right now, just go home and read it. It's a novel that's ostensibly about trees, and about so much more than that as well. And one of the characters in the novel, Patty Westerford, has left the field of forestry science and taken a job as a park ranger. She encounters a group of scientists in the forest studying, quote, a cedar trunk on the wet forest floor, and they have the following exchange. When I was a student, my teacher told us that fallen trunks were nothing but obstacles and fire hazards. The man on the ground looks up at her. Mine said the same thing. Clear them off to improve forest health. Burn them out for safety and cleanliness. Above all, keep them out of streams. Lay down the law and get the stagnant place producing again. And the passage continues. Improve forest health, as if forests were waiting all these 400 million years for us newcomers to come cure them. Science in the service of willful blindness. How could so many smart people have missed the obvious? A person has only to look to see that dead logs are far more alive than living ones. But the senses never have much chance against the power of doctrine. The power of doctrine. So returning to Scott, I will talk about healthcare eventually, but returning to Scott, as he describes this doctrine, quote, utilitarian discourse replaces the term nature with the term natural resources, focusing on those aspects of nature that can be appropriated for human use. And we can add the phrase human resources. Do you have that here?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that. As we replace our own vibrant, complex, multifaceted human life world to quantifiable metrics supporting profit to the detriment of other forms of gain, such as happiness, dignity, care, poetry, etc. Scott explores the effect of such utilitarian discourse on humans in the context of, for example, urban planning. And as he describes, the centrally planned high modernist Corbusian city of Brasilia created, quote, the disease of what residents termed Brasilite, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, apologies, meaning roughly Brasilia-itis. As a mock clinical condition, it connotes a rejection of the standardization and anonymity of life in Brasilia. So now, finally, returning back to healthcare, throughout Fighting for the Soul of General Practice, we find ample, vivid illustration of the means by which this impoverishment by the dominant scientific, bureaucratic method results in oftentimes undesirable outcomes, while still, of course, acknowledging the tremendous gains that modern medicine brings us. And the book joins a tradition of course, critique of modern medicine. For example, according to neurologist Antonio Damasio, a near-exclusive emphasis on pathophysiology, some might say predicated upon a Cartesian mind-body split, has, I wouldn't say that, but some others might say that, has resulted in, quote, an amputation of the concept of humanity with which medicine does its job. Or, as philosopher Drew Letter puts it, quote, physicians have searched for an ideal of perfect presence, the immediate gaze, the unambiguous number. Yet this has led medicine away from the very real presence upon which it is founded, that of the living patient. What this book offers is an emphasis on the effects of utilitarian discourse in its systematic application. We can understand this as we speak about patients understood as resources themselves, as clinicians apply diagnostic codes or take a history, as John, you were illuminating this particular phrasing, or reduce an ethics conundrum to a yes or no checkbox, as Art has written about. And now it has befallen physicians as well, many of you, with so much brilliance and dedication, and yet examining the ways in which your own professional autonomy has been stripped away, and to ask ourselves to what extent are physicians reduced to being fungible cogs within the biomedical system, which is a fate not worthy of them. So in my view, the book is a message in a bottle, an urgent bulletin describing some of the destructive effects of this utilitarian discourse on contemporary healthcare. Like Brasilia-itis, the effects include widespread disaffection and harm, both among those seeking care as well as clinicians. As the authors describe, quote, the moral injury which results from having to continually act in a way that is counter to one's values and to the particularities of the context almost certainly drives burnout and attrition in a service which is already overstretched. Just as the monocrop forest depletes the ecological life world of the soil, resulting in forest death, in healthcare, the potential result is care death. So that leaves us with a question, well, many questions, but among those, if we want to try to redress this situation, then what are the means of trying to do so? And if you'll forgive me, by way of analogy, returning to scientific forestry, once the deleterious effects of clearing the forest for monocrops was recognized, one approach to redressing the problem were these programs of forest hygiene and restoration forestry. Jens, can you describe this for us, since you said you experienced it as a child in the German forest?
Yeah, my childhood experiences in a German forest is that it's Fichtenwald and conifers, like in an army, all orthogonal. You had also these the paths were very nice to walk on because it's all full of these little pine. Yes, very, very nice, a certain smell. But there were attempts to recolonize, rewild, or refresh them. So you had ant colonies where you could study ants and poke and see what's happening if you disturb the environment. And it was, on the whole, quite bizarre because it was very, very regimented. You could see a long way in this German Fichtenwald, and you could study the interaction of this old way of forest management and ways to recolonize or do a bit of ecology in it.
Thank you. Right, so Scott describes this as this what was called forest hygiene. So, for example, to quote Scott, in place of hollow trees that had been home to woodpeckers, owls, and other tree-nesting birds, the foresters provided specially designed boxes. And he gives other examples. Ant colonies were artificially raised and implanted in the forest. Their nests tended by local school children here with us today. Reintroducing species of spiders and so forth. So Scott says, what's striking about these endeavors is that they're attempts to work around an impoverished habitat still planted with a single species of conifers for production purposes. In this case, restoration forestry attempted with mixed results to create a virtual ecology while denying its chief sustaining condition, diversity. And so, again, so returning back to healthcare, I wonder if this analogy can illuminate some of the ways in which we're trying to redress some of the effects of the biomedical system and reintroduce humanism. And here I would add, be open to critique of my own home field, which is narrative medicine as we practice it at Columbia. But could we understand many reform efforts in healthcare in this sense? Boxes of cultivated ant colonies placed judiciously within the biomedical forest, just enough to offer the illusion of diverse forms of life, while the system, in fact, continues to plant and harvest in uniform rows, effectively forestalling meaningful change. So I'm curious to hear, perhaps in the discussion, what your thoughts are about this. One example is communication skills training. In the U.S., it's taught under the guise of professionalism. So to communicate better, you should look at people and maybe sit down and nod your head, things like this. Which, again, are these the boxes of the ant colonies placed back in the forest? Okay, we have our answer, right? So my own field of narrative medicine, I know there are different versions of it, and I'm happy that they're in dialogue. Here is a very important place for narrative medicine. And then at Columbia, of course, the field founded by Dr. Rita Sharon in collaboration with a group of interdisciplinary scholars and practitioners. And there, her primary articulation of the field offers a different approach, which is, to quote her, she says, "Good readers make good doctors." And so it's an interesting field in the sense that it's both a methodology as well as more open-ended field of inquiry. But on the methodological side, the idea is, to quote her again, narrative medicine is, quote, "medicine practiced with the narrative competence to recognize, absorb, interpret, and be moved by the stories of illness." So with this premise, then the physician receiving a story of illness must be attentive not just to the data as it fits into the checkboxes of the electronic medical record, like, so is the eczema better or worse, but also to the form and content of the story. All the aspects of storytelling that we study when we study literature, for example. Who's the narrator? Where does it begin? What's left out? What sort of voice, temporality, tone, all these different aspects of the story, to be attentive to all of these as well. And we ask a central question, not just to belittle the professionalism angle, look at people and nod and smile, but on a deeper level, truly, what does it mean to offer attention? How possible is it in all cases? I'm thinking, Jens, of you're disclosing now your own clinical vignette about just not having it left in you. What does it mean to closely read and observe and interpret? And here, this textual metaphor of narrative medicine, of this idea of reading, I think just opens up a space for us to consider these questions in a slightly different way. So to quote the overstory again, slow, long observation makes a laughingstock of what people think about trees. In a nutshell, the rich brown batter of soil, itself mostly unknown microbes and invertebrates, perhaps 1 million species, channels decay and builds on death in ways she only now begins to suss out. So similarly, when we read a complex work of literature, or when we try to receive the story of a fellow human being with humility and care and attentiveness, then we find that this rich, complex text of whatever sort never exhausts our understanding or our gaze or our capacity to interpret in different ways. And I just want to add that I think that this figure of reader, text, writer, and so forth in narrative medicine also sets up a very productive subversion of its own terms, which is to say that once we consider reading and writing and text in relation to healthcare, then we can also ask, well, okay, so then who is it who gets to be the reader and the interpreter? Is it only the clinician? I'm all for clinicians, all of you who are physicians. I hope that you're good readers and interpreters. But also, once we have this model, then might it prompt us to embolden all of us, those seeking care as well as those attempting to offer it, to be better readers and interpreters and writers, and to strive for whatever degree of reciprocity and collaboration is possible. And to be asking that question, to be asking it together, to be asking it collaboratively. And then in my own study, in my own work coming out of the field of narrative medicine, I'm interested in a phenomenon that I've called metanosis, which it's a neologism that I coined to describe it. I'm interested in, it describes when you have a diagnosis of a long-standing condition that you didn't know about. That happens either when you just didn't know about it. So that happened to me when I learned that I have a big visual field defect that had just remained occult for most of my life. And once my doctors found out that it wasn't something nefarious, I mean, it was long-standing and it just never been detected, then they sort of packed me along my way and said, good for you, you don't have MS or a brain tumor. And I said, that's great. But I found that there was a narrative rupture in, from one moment to the next, learning something so striking about my own body and self and experience, and I didn't know how to situate it. I also was connected to, in my previous career, I was the art director for David Byrne, formerly of Talking Heads, musician, artist. And in the early 2000s, he informally self-diagnosed with what we then called Asperger's syndrome. I'm no psychiatrist, but if anybody's on the autism spectrum, I think David probably is. And that was also another experience of, well, that was also because the diagnostic boundaries had shifted, right? We all know this, that the diagnosis had expanded so much. But then from one moment to the next, realizing that one might be said to have a certain pathological category in which one belongs, how to renegotiate those categories in that moment, right? Because there's no precipitating injury or new onset illness to explain it. So it presents a narrative conundrum. So my book, Metanosis, Revelatory Narratives of Health and Identity, explores this through a bunch of different lenses, but primarily a narrative lens, to try to account for what's so destabilizing about this experience in particular, and how it offers a kind of a prism through which to re-examine and hopefully renegotiate the relationship between, say, a clinical narrative, well, you have this diagnosis, you have this condition, okay, and also the narrative of one's lived experience, and many other narratives that intersect, and to ask ourselves, well, how is it possible then to empower people to balance, negotiate these different narratives in a way that will be most productive for them. So to conclude, my own work in narrative medicine writ large is an intrinsically and profoundly interdisciplinary field, interested in crossing different academic realms, professional domains, and genres. For we seek to bring literature and philosophy and other disciplines into conversation with healthcare, seeing the interconnection of life worlds. And the hope and the promise of doing this is that we can communicate and form new communities of living things. So on this theme of connection, I will cite the last passage from the Overstory, in which Patty, this forestry scientist, has been exiled from the scientific community when her research on the ways trees communicate via airborne signaling is repudiated. She goes to work as a forest ranger, and years later she learns that her results have been validated. So here's the passage. Unknown to her, while she rehabs backcountry fire rings and cleans up illegal campsites fouled with beer cans and toilet paper, an article appears. It's published in a reputable journal, one of the best that humankind has managed. Trees trade airborne aerosol signals, the article says. They make medicines. Their fragrances alert and awaken their neighbors. They can sense an attacking species and summon an air force to come to their aid. The authors cite her earlier, much-mocked article. They reproduce her findings and extend them into surprising places. Words of hers that she has all but forgotten have gone on drifting out on the open air, lighting up others like a waft of pheromones. This passage touches me and leaves me with a feeling of hope that the work we do in seeking connection is important, even at times when it may appear to be futile. And it brings to mind a deeply moving story from the chapter of Fighting for the Soul of General Practice titled Waiting to Connect, with which Art alluded to earlier, which I think is not a coincidence, in which Rue describes a distressed individual seeking care, yet, quote, stuck in a loop, shuttled between different services for years. And she asks, what is left? Where can you send me to get help? And resisting the sort, fix, send rubric, Rue asks her about her traumatic childhood, and the woman is surprised and asks what the purpose of discussing that would be. And Rue replies, I'm not sure where I can send you, so I'm offering you myself. So this book is an offering. The authors are offering us themselves, offering connection and challenging us to do the same, and to ask, how do the systems we have created constrain or nourish such connection? And this is really one of the animating questions of our time. And so in that spirit, I'll close with a question. In this brave new world which we now inhabit, how can we offer ourselves to one another? Thank you.
So wonderful. Thank you. Please start. I think lots of people will want to ask you things. We have got food and drink and stuff at the back, but I think it's such a golden opportunity to have a conversation. Does anyone want to ask Danielle anything or make any comments? So beautifully put.
I love what you said, everything you said.
Perfect. I'm just sort of trying to grapple with this idea of a structure, actually, so we don't want to go back in time to the black bag. But how can we build in some wiggle room, into the machine? Is there a tolerance, or is there maybe that's what we take from this, is that we just need to build in some wiggle room,
Yeah, absolutely. And this model that Bob and I are hoping to expand on in the book that we'll edit together is positioning with parity of esteem the biomedical and what we've called finding and creating meaning, hermeneutics, alongside each other. And our kind of proposal is that they're of equal value, and it's not the soft stuff, because all through my training this was always the soft stuff, and it's just not soft. Yeah, very much so. I think Vayu and Edwina, and then Edwina.
Very quickly, I just want to say, I want to thank all the 5 speakers and everybody here for the contributions. And I was very struck, Daniela, by the interdisciplinarity that you bring in. And thankfully, there is a space for art in medicine, not artifice or artificial. And that's where the empathy and the human factor comes in. So I don't have very much to say because other people are more erudite, but I just want to say, what is it? And I see the 2 people who are writing this book, who are offering themselves. I want us to find out, what do we mean by the word patient? Who is being patient? That's one thing. You both are. But there's something in the tonality of voices of people who are hurried by time, who have to offer their service to something called a patient. Somewhere a tone of condescension arrives, and that for the patient is excruciating, and they cannot endure any more patience. So I don't want to go on about that, but I was just thinking about this whole act of listening and how different it is from hearing, you know. And I don't know if in education that the education of training new people coming in, and also this interaction of people who are being treated to also understand with care what is being offered and what is given. You know, it has to, that's what empathy is about. It does take 2 hands to clap. So I just want to make that offering. And a small thing that I've learned from walking around the Chelsea Physic Garden where I guide, and it was instituted by the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries, not religious. It was about worship used as a term, about giving value to plants and how they heal, or distinguishing how they harm, and that is what is being worshipped. I hope we bring back that value in our own humanity. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I don't know, Danielle, if you wanted to. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Both. I don't know, Danielle, if you wanted to respond to my. He's got a doctorate in storytelling, by the way. So.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, in our field, we seek to bring experiences with the arts way upstream early on in clinical education, with this metaphor between reading, meant in a broad sense. It could also be looking at a work of visual art, and listening, and the humility and reflection that can engender, and the skills that it engenders too. But I do think too but also going to this theme of what role does it have? In a way, as long as it's seen as just this palliative, restorative practice, then it's always going, I think it just reinforces this hierarchy, as opposed to saying that hermeneutics is actually central to the practice of medicine. And so I worry about that. We were once at a medical school doing a workshop where they were introducing narrative medicine into the curriculum there, which was great, except that they said, well, we're going to call it, it's going to come between the nephrology section and the cardiac section, and we're going to call it the intersession. And I said, well, I read my Derrida, I don't know if, but you're creating a hierarchy here in which, I didn't say that, I don't bring up Derrida when I'm in clinical spaces except today, but you're setting up a hierarchy in which you've already devalued it. And so, but it's tricky because you try to be strategic. If you can gain entrance into a space that you didn't have entrance in formerly, then sometimes I think of it like a Trojan horse that you go inside, and then, and I think that narrative medicine is a bit like this, because it starts off by saying, better readers make better doctors. We're going to offer you these clinical skills. But then once inside, the act of reading and interpreting is, of course, one that invites uncertainty. And so the Trojan horse the book bursts out of the belly of the horse, to forgive my mixed metaphor, not to destroy the city, but to save it.
Edwina and Victoria and Al.
Oh.
What's for dinner? And I also would like to say something after that.
Edwina?
Just thanking you all the speakers and the questions. And I think someone spoke about wriggle room and how do we create wriggle room. I certainly haven't found a solution, because I went from long-term sort of partnership work as a GP to locating right now. That was my solution to a wriggle room, which is definitely not a systems solution. But I think there is something in that, and there's different ways I wanted to know. One is that as a partner, you're caught between the rich forest and the planted, conifers one next to each other, and you're like, oh, which one's my forest? And the big problem is that your income is linked to the pine trees.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's a conflict of interest, which actually, having come out of it, because the profits in general have gone from being quite good to, kind of changing and going down. And I think the forest of conifers is definitely changing as well. But the conflict of interest of having to aim for one's income versus, really providing good medicine in its science and art is something that I would say is the future. That there's a wriggle room there which I think needs to change. And I know some partnerships reinvest all profit into the practice. But I think the topic of money is really, really important, actually, even though it's so unpoetic in one sense. It's key to reform.
Well, I think it's very linked with what Camilla was saying before, and it is the elephant in the room. And
it is the elephant in the room, absolutely, and it caused so much conflict in my practice between salaried GPs and partners in times of stress of the pandemic, which was very sad. And then the other thing is, I think for trainees, for new doctors, if they don't know that actually the current landscape is, there's still the partnership model. It's still going to be that you're looking for your income from these sources which are not linked to what you're being taught
in terms of how to be a good GP, we're going to lose even more and more people. And I just wonder if there is space here for really slowing down and a humility as doctors to perhaps learn less, that's absolutely fine for me, but to have the time to just say, actually, I'm going to, before I get to the point where I cannot deal with this patient because I'm saturated, I'm going to have permission through the system, through my colleagues, through myself, to take a break. I'm going to have the permission to say, I cannot save everyone. And I think that's something that, you know, it's a humility actually more than and an allowance. And I think that's also collaboration with the patient in front of us to say, I'm human, you are human. I'm finite, you are finite. How do we incorporate that in the conversation in a real way, so that also informs what's happening at management level. That they can see that a person, a GP or a nurse or a clinician, can only provide a certain number of encounters, and that's okay. That's okay.
Thank you so much.
I would like to bring at that point Rebecca and Amit in, because you have experiences in management or compassionate management, what administration can do to create this flourishing space, or Amit who fiddles with Accurex as a tool to access general practice, not to filter and say no, but as a way to access and make a dialogue happen.
So I suppose, I mean, that was part of my question about the hidden script. So somebody who trained as a nurse, so and that value of caring was very prominent in my training.
Yes, with care death.
So it was very much like, but trained and then went into management and spent 25 years in management and then returned to clinical practice after 25 years out and started to observe the system in a different way. And I think what I was struck by was actually the hidden narrative of what clinicians are doing, and that people don't understand really the nature of the work, which is why I think your book is so powerful. It really grounds it in reality. But how you help people in managerial roles who haven't got that background to hear it, to not be overwhelmed by it themselves, because they feel the sense of responsibility of holding the level of risk that actually is being managed in the system, and to work with them to say, so how do we organise it in a way that recognises that risk, recognises the emotional toil that it places on clinicians doing it, and engage with patients and citizens to understand what is it that we want from our healthcare system, and what are we willing to compromise on, because if we push for efficiency, productivity, all of that language all the time, it will compromise the relational aspects, which is what people are talking about. So I think to Edwina's point about the conversation, that's a hard conversation to have in a consultation, but it's a much more public conversation.
It is. I feel like we have to redefine perhaps what we mean by patient safety, because it's the ultimate checkmate, and there's a lot of assumptions that go into that, but actually being safe incorporates completely the relational and the hermeneutic. Victoria's had her hand up for a long time.
Thank you. Victoria Georgia Brown, I'm the Vice Chair for the Royal College of GPs and the GP in East London and an academic at KBL. So thank you very much for inviting me here today. Very thought-provoking, all the presentations. And actually quite timely because I guess professional behavior and patient behavior does depend to a great degree to the medical education and training and ongoing reflection. And for patients, health literacy and all sorts of education and reflection that patients do as well. But to a great degree, all of these, the behavior is influenced by policies, so external factors as well. And we are now at a time that there is a lot of change. So we have just finished the consultation on incentives for general practice. We are talking a lot about the value of continuity. There is increasingly more evidence on value of continuity. I just came from an LMC meeting, conference rather, where they voted on whether continuity should be incentivized financially. which was an interesting question. We are talking about whether we should have a maximum number of patients with full-time equivalent GP, whether we need the PCNs or not, our primary care networks, which, if implemented well, can offer an opportunity for more holistic care. So there are lots of opportunities to influence health policy out there. Hopefully also bring more investment into general practice, which we desperately need. However, what the Department of Health and politicians come back to us is, how do we know that it will be better? So my question to you is, what outcomes would you suggest that we use to ensure that this narrative general practice is implemented well? Would you use outcomes, for example, on patient experience, the I statements that we produced a while ago in North East London through the Vanguard? Would you use staff experience, GP experience and morale? You don't have to, it's a big question, and you don't have to answer it now, but if you have any thoughts, and you please email me, because we do.
I'd love to. We've got lots of thoughts.
There was so much already in these little chambers where we are debating things, so yes. There are so many.
Should we say
Shall we? How much time do we have until we proceed from whining to dining?
Depends how urgently you need the prosecco and the falafel.
I imagine this is such a big ask to get people to come here on Friday evening to even sit. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even see that you were sitting on the floor. I'm so sorry. So I reckon we've got time for 2 more questions and maybe a couple of final comments, and then we must start eating and drinking by 5:30.
Al's question. Al's question.
I have an idea. Maybe not a question. Everybody wants to say something, says something, and we don't reply. And because you don't want to say something, nobody should be shut up. But and then we talk about it afterwards.
Because
so
we've got
maximum
time.
10 statements.
Okay, so Al and then Mark.
I was just going to point out the carrot versus the stick of the GMC duty to be kind, and whether you can mandate something that is so nebulous, and if by mandating it, it's like dissecting the frog, you killed it and you've missed.
Noted.
Yes, we've got a piece in the BJGP coming out about this because we felt so strongly about it.
The regulator told us we have to be kind.
I was just going to say something about, I'm Marika Simon, very much a clinical GP, but also very much in the management world, from ICBs and CCGs and all the rest. But in terms of getting more investment into general practice, for example, but all of primary care, all of that happens outside of a hospital, and I'm also a NED in a hospital trust, so I kind of get that. But it's actually one of the other things is the independent contractor status, the fact that ultimately one of the elephants is that, well, we would invest with you more, but we're never quite sure how much you're drawing in earnings, you partners, because you're great, you're smart, you can do what you need to do, and then we'll. But and actually, there's a lot of places where the differential between partners and salaried is negligible, and actually proposing to have an open book, we will tell you what the practice is, and we'll have checks and balances, and in return, you will have permissions to be much more flexible with what you do with your money. You'll have some extra investment. You'll have this, that, and the other. And it's something I'm, at the moment promoting as a thing. But I think that's another area where if you can get that, and that will give you the wiggle room, that will hopefully allow us the mental space to be able to do the third way, to pay attention to
I think you're right.
And also have the proper narrative-based discussion with people.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Mary?
And then
I love the book. I read it in about 2 hours. And I echo what Rebecca said about sort of the hidden work and the hidden joys of caring. And it struck me that actually nobody knows what goes on in our consultation rooms. We're there with our patients. And even
many of the practice staff don't know what goes on in that, and how rich and how valuable it is. And then, sorry, I haven't really formulated my thoughts. This strikes me as a book that needs to be read by everyone, because I think we feel the value of these relationships, but I think we have to be clear that our patients feel it as well, and that the politicians who are tasked with sorting out the mess of our NHS attribute some value to it, because until that happens, I don't think we're going to be, our work is going to be valued, and that part of our work is going to be valued. Sorry, I've not
You expressed yourself beautifully.
David?
Yeah, okay. I'll confine it to a little partial disagreement with what some other people have said about golden ages. There is never a golden age, of course. If you scratch beneath the surface of any glitter, you will find a shadowed subterranean, any era. Now, the golden age, in inverted commas, of general practice, which I was in the 1970s, of course, you're right. We dealt with diabetics much less systematically. We often didn't know who they were. We didn't know people's blood pressure. We didn't know who'd been back. All of that systemic stuff was not good. There was also a high DSR count, duffers, slackers and rotters, right? And that has largely been eliminated by modern management and standardization. So what was the golden age about? Well, it was about high morale. People didn't want to retire, right? My colleagues were mostly, there were exceptions, they mostly liked their work.
So there wasn't as much burnout.
Sorry?
Wasn't as much burnout.
Well, sure, there wasn't so much burnout, there wasn't so much suicide, there wasn't so much addiction, they were much happier. So what is it that we have to learn from that specious golden age? Well, it was the fact that we had stability and stability of staff clusters. We could get to know one another. We got to know patients. We got to know neighbourhoods, families. That's where the satisfaction came. That's where the art was based on. It was on knowing one another. I knew my receptionists very well. I knew my colleagues. I knew the local practitioners. I knew the hospital consultants. That has gone, and it has largely been technology driven, because technology makes it possible for us to very efficiently signal one another, which has displaced communication. Communication is a bilateral act of resonance. Signaling is a unilateral act.
Yeah.
And that is what we've lost. And that is the demise of the golden age. Okay, I'll stop.
That's beautifully put, David. Maybe three more comments. Paquita, Eugenia, and Camilla. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you.
Just a quick comment. I think it's brilliant that we're having this conversation within our healthcare professionals. But what Rebecca's point was about talking to the public, our expectation of the health system, the politicians' expectation of the health system. And we haven't had that many conversations of actually this health system is finite. We can't have everything that we want because there's so limited resource. And when the friction starts, yesterday at Sidcup at 1 p.m, a GP got stabbed by his patient in the practice. The patient got arrested to take him to police in custody. The GP got taken to trauma. He's alive, so that's a good news. But actually, the trauma of both what the patient expects and what the healthcare system is so broken that it ends up in such violence in the practice. So I think the much needed conversation and colleagues who are in organisations that really represent us speaking loud and clear, and hopefully with a general election come, who knows what's in store. So I think now is a really good time.
It's a really important. I don't know if anyone's read Iona Heath's lecture, Patient Earth is Dying, and it's very powerful in this whole idea of sufficiency. It's a very difficult conversation to start having, I think. I wasn't meant to respond, I'm breaking the rules, sorry. Paquita.
No, I mean, I just want
want to say I love this idea of creating flourishing spaces, wiggle, but to me it's tinkering, and I'm going to be radical. I think we really do need a paradigm shift. In fact, we are in one. It's happening, and the phase 2, the era 2 is breaking up.
Yes.
It ain't working. No one's happy. So there has to be, and that means that, and actually it's old, because this all comes from Taylorism. Frederick Taylor was in 1912, the scientific management of organizations. And that's what we are seeing now. Sort of neo-Taylorism, Taylorism on steroids, Taylorism on AI, and so there has to be actually, a revolution really, as
Victor
Montori says. There has to be, and how can we do it? Can we be like the trees, sort of sending off not pheromones, but whatever they're called, and really kind of gathering ourselves. We can't do it individually, you have to do it collectively, but we've got to get that momentum, because the little tinkerings, the little nice little sort of forest hygiene, it's not enough. Sorry.
No, I agree. I agree.
John, you are getting up. That looks final.
I think I'm going to let someone who hasn't spoken yet say something. Connie.
Just really quickly, just wanted to say thank you, and I'm so sorry it's late and I missed some of it, but I love the analogy with the forest and the anthills, and it just reminded me of social prescribing at the moment, because it's kind of, it's trying to fit something that's meant to be sort of healing, bringing in the wider determinants of health, but doing it in a way that's kind of wrong, right? That's kind of transactional and utilitarian, and actually, makes it all kind of fall over actually, because it's not. So I just wanted to say that I really loved that idea, and it made me think what you said just now about changing the system and a massive paradigm shift, because anything else won't do, because it'll just die.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I think, in general practice, we're facing a crisis of identity, and we absolutely have to have a conversation about what gives our profession meaning. That's essential. And whether we're allowed to do this messy, uncertain, relational, individualized care or not. And thank you so much for saying that, Connie. I'm going to hand over to John.
Final words.
As well as being invited to give the welcome and introduction, I was also invited to prepare a closing address. Something told me I wouldn't have to prepare very much, and my decision not to prepare one at all has now been completely Thank you to everyone. I just want to say enormous thank you to Art, to Danielle, most of all to Jens and Rue for providing the trigger for this sort of quite an astonishing event, which is a real milestone in the history of ANT. I want to thank all of you for coming and being so engaged and wanting to continue after 2.5 hours, which I think is quite extraordinary. So the only other thing I have to say is enjoy the wine, enjoy the falafel, and enjoy the conversation with each other, which you're very happy to continue for another 1.5 hours, because I believe we have the building until
continue the conversation.
7
You
o'clock.
need a plan.
Okay. Have I got that right, Victoria? 7 o'clock?
7 o'clock, I think we have to be out of here.
We have to have the building 7
Can I
o'clock.
make a couple of just domestic arrangements, announcements before, or Jens?
Please.
Yes, you wanted, that's for you. There's a little story. There are 3. So I've been instructed to get champagne, so I went to a special shop in Soho. And it's not getting your booze from the petrol station. It's not so there's one for you, Victoria. Please come. You have to choose.
Extraordinary. Thank you.
There are 3 different stories.
I have to ask, it's English champagne, do they not make Welsh champagne?
Oh, they do, but they don't have the same limestone. So this one, you have to have there's a choice. This one is more robust. But the vendor avoided the word masculine. This one is more creamy, more light. You will know when it's in the glass. And this one is actually not champagne. It's English, but supposedly maybe better than champagne. So which one do you want?
I think you should choose and just distribute them as you wish.
So,
Thank you.
and where's Debbie?
Oh, she's gone.
Oh no.
She had to go back to the college.
Okay. So which one do you want? The more or the more creamy?
Well, look, get me through a triathlon.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's been such a joyful occasion to be co-organising with Debbie. Really, it has. You're just amazing. Very quick domestic arrangement. Any minute now, that hatch is going to open. There's going to be falafel.
To be able to be part of celebrating Jens and Ru's book, which I think I agree with John is just an enormous contribution. The things that I have time to say today are part of a longer piece that I've written about that, which is going to be published in the journal Perspectives in Biology and Medicine. And I wanted to publish it there in part to be sure that this book